The proclamation of martial law is not a military takeover. I, as your duly elected President of the Republic, use this power, which may be implemented by the military authorities, but still is a power embodied in the Constitution, to protect the Republic of the Philippines and our democracy.
Buongiorno listeners, welcome to the presentation of Group 4. What is Constitution and its purpose? A constitution is a set of regulations that govern the operation of a country, state, or political entity. In the Philippines, we have a total of 6 constitutions, and in this video we're going to talk about one of its constitution, the 1975 Constitutional Authoritarianism.
In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. That makes him the 10th president of the Philippines after winning the Philippine presidential election against Diosdado Macapagal. In 1967, the Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. Note that the 1935 Constitution, which had a political system that was nearly identical to that of the United States, a president elected at large for a 4-year term, subject to 1 re-election, a bicameral Congress, and an independent judiciary were all part of the system. Marcos won the re-election in 1969 in a bid boosted by campaign overspending the use of the government funds. He was the first president to be re-elected because of his desirous remaining in power. There was an election of delegates in November 20, 1970. Convention started formally on June 1, 1971 with the former President Carlos Garcia, but unfortunately he died and was succeeded by another former president, and that is Diosdado Macapagal. And on September 21, 1972, former president issued the proclamation number 1081 that placed the entire Philippines under martial law, and he declared martial law before this his last term. The reason behind the martial law was because of the growing communist insurgency. To suppress increasing civil strife and on the threat of a newly founded Communist Party of the Philippines, the CPP-NPA following a series of bombings in Manila. And after that, Marcos dictates or manipulated a constitutional convention that resulted in the writing of a new constitution, which is the 1973 Constitution. In November 29, 1972, the proposed constitution was approved. In the 1973 Constitution consists of a preamble and 12 articles, provides for the shift from presidential to parliamentary system of government. For the first time in the Philippine history, a parliamentary government or parliamentary-style government established. A prime minister and a president both were elected by the National Assembly. The president was to be elected as symbolic and ceremonial head of the state who will serve for 6 years and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. While the prime minister was entrusted to the executive power, who was also the head of the government and commander-in-chief of armed forces. The legislative power is vested in a Congress which is divided into 2 houses, the Senate and the House of the Representatives, in the unicameral National Assembly. The Philippine Senate is the upper chamber of the country's legislature. The Congress of the Philippines, its mission is to foster a national perspective of national policy in order to establish a wealthy, secure, honest, and democratic country. While the House of the Representative is the lower house of the Congress in the Philippines and has the power to impeach certain officials.
Presidential Decree Number 73, issued by President Marcos, setting the date of the plebiscite. Plebiscite means the direct vote of all the members of an electorate according to Google. Plebiscite, ratify, or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. The plebiscite was postponed due to Marcos' fear that the public might vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizen assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973, voting by hand. The citizen attended and decided on whether to ratify the constitution, suspend the convening of the interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. January 17, 1973, the President issued a proclamation number 1102, which he announced that the proposed constitution, the 1973 Constitution, had been ratified by the overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular citizen assemblies. In 1976, citizen assemblies decided to allow the continuation of martial law in the following amendments. Interim Batasang Pambansa to substitute for Interim National Assembly. The President to become the Prime Minister and continue to exercise legislative power, and martial law was lifted for emergency basis. In 1981, parliamentary system was formally modified to a French style. Executive power to the President, who was to be directly elected. Executive Committee will be created, composed of the Prime Minister and 14 others that serve as the President's cabinet, and some electoral reform was instituted. In 1984, Executive Committee was abolished and the Vice President was restored. After all the amendments introduced, 1973 Constitution was just a way for President to keep executive powers, abolish the Senate, and never acted as parliamentary system but an authoritarian presidential system. Note that the authoritarian or authoritarianism is a form of government wherein the political plurality was rejected and reductions in the rule of law. So, basically, there's a lot of human violations. In 1980, situation had been very turbulent as Marcos amassed power and happiness has also been growing. In August 1983, Benigno Aquino came over and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos was assassinated after his exile from US. There was a suspicion that the assassination of Aquino was ordered from the top government and military. Marcos was then forced to hold an early election and declared himself winner despite international condemnation and nationwide protest. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, this triggered what came to be known as EDSA People's Power Revolution of 1986. That gathered millions of Filipinos from all walks of life to end the dictatorship of Ferdinand E. Marcos and begin a new era marked by true freedom and democracy, while the family Marcoses fled to the United States. His opponent in the election, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow, Corazon Aquino, was installed as president on 25 February 1986.
Let's recap. 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. 1969, he won the re-election. September 21, 1972, martial law was declared because of the communist threat. November 29, 1972, the proposed constitution was approved that consists of a preamble and 12 articles and the replacement from the presidential to a parliamentary system of government. January 17, 1973, the 1973 Constitution had been ratified. 1973 Constitution was a way for President to keep executive power, abolish the Senate, and never acted as parliamentary system but an authoritarian presidential system. August 1983, Benigno Aquino was assassinated. 1986 EDSA People's Power Revolution that attended millions of Filipinos to end the dictatorship of President Ferdinand Marcos. And during the same year, 25th of February, Corazon Aquino was installed as president. And for the last portion of this video, the 3 issues, problems or events that the Filipino and the country have suffered and the corresponding solutions or recommendations.
Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, or CPP-NPA, was formed on December 26, 1968. During Marcos' era, on August 21, 1971, was their first attack and bombed the stage of Liberal Party rally in Manila Plaza, Miranda. And the late President Ferdinand Marcos was blamed for the attack of CPP-NPA because it killed the opposition. And until now, the group CPP-NPA is still active. In fact, a recent event happened in the rural area of Davao de Oro that 101st Infantry Brigade encountered the NPA and 5 rebels are died. But now, our Philippine government tried to assist the rebels turn into their loyalty to the government. And it have many benefits for them for living, like livelihood assistance, medical assistance, and many more. It encouraged the rebels member to surrender to the authorities, and it can make lessen the communists here in the Philippines.
Martial law. What is martial law? Why this martial law turned as issue here in the Philippine country? Martial law was declared in the Philippines September 21, 1972, became the official date that martial law was established and the day that the Marcos dictatorship began. Ferdinand Marcos suggested to implement martial law in order to strengthen the safety of our people, and every people agreed to implement the martial law for good. Martial law involves the temporary substitution of military authority for civilian rule and is usually invoked in time of war, rebellion, or natural disaster. When martial law is in effect, the military commander of an area or country has unlimited authority to make and enforce laws. It suppresses increasing civil strife and the threat of a communist takeover following a series of bombings. That's why Ferdinand Marcos needs to make a law that can secure the safety of his nation. Some people have an issue to martial law because in time of it, many people were tortured. They blame Marcos of that crimes, but Marcos did not intended to kill someone if they have good intentions to the nation. We recommend for this issue is that every people need to abide the law to have a comfortable life and to secure the safety of our nation. Because Ferdinand Marcos do not make a law that people will suffer from the environment of every individuals. If every people here in the Philippines will follow the rules of the president and the rebellions will not against, we will have a peace in our nation.
Lastly, Aquino's assassination is credited with transforming the opposition to the Marcos regime from a small isolated movement into national crusade. It is also credited with thrusting Aquino's widow, Corazon Aquino, into public spotlight and her running for president in 1986 snap election. Although Marcos was officially declared the winner of the election, widespread allegations of fraud and illegal tampering on Marcos' behalf are credited with sparking the People Power Revolution, which resulted in Marcos fleeing the country and conceding the presidency to Mrs. Aquino. The assassination of Benigno S. Aquino Jr. are the biggest issue at their time by investigating the crime scene and questioning the killer who are the one who pushed him to kill the former president. Lastly, I recommend that don't blame everything to Ferdinand Marcos, not because he is the opposing leader of Benigno Aquino Jr., but we can't blame the people who hates the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos.
Thank you for listening. Group members.